Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to look at Mecha Break on Intel Arc GPU from the A310 to the B580. Welcome to Respawn PC, I'm Dunk, let's game on. Starting off first with the Arc A310 on the i5-12600K and 32GB of RAM, we're playing at 1080p, medium settings, XeSS quality, and we get an average FPS of 80. The GPU is pegged at 99%, but only using 2.6GB of VRAM out of 4. For the CPU usage, we are in the mid-20s, and for the RAM, we are at 13.4 out of 32. Also to keep in mind, I'm currently only in the prologue / learning the command and control of the game. FPS probably going to vary when you're finally in a group versus another group, but that's a start. Switching to the A380, we now have 6GB of VRAM if it matter at any point, because we max out at 3.5GB of VRAM out of 6, but now we are in actually gameplay against other player. We're in a PvP, two teams against each other. I kept the exact same setting as the A310, so we are at 1080p, medium settings, and XeSS quality. And that is to have a target of 60 FPS or more. Since this is a eSport / PvP game, you want as much FPS as you can. But now since we're getting 62 FPS average with the A380, I have some doubt that the A310 can do the same. Probably going to have to drop the A310 to low settings and XeSS balance or even performance. Next up, we have my favorite Intel Arc GPU, the A580 with 8GB of VRAM. We're still at 1080p, but now we have the preset of I and XeSS Deep Learning, whatever that means. I think they mean AA or native. This is the first time I see Deep Learning. Anyway, this is the highest XeSS settings for whatever that means. Anyway, for those settings with XeSS Deep Learning, we have the GPU pegged at 99%, only using 3.5GB of VRAM out of 8. CPU, we are the mid-30s, and the RAM in 14GB of VRAM out of 32 to get an average FPS of 76. This is highly playable since we are higher than 60 FPS for eSport PvP game. Not a first-person shooter, a third-person shooter, but still a shooter. Jumping now to the 700 series of Intel Arc, the A750. This is an 8GB VRAM card for what it's worth, because we're only using 4.1GB VRAM for once. We passed the 4GB VRAM utilization line, but this time we're playing at 1080p, yes, but the setting preset is Ultra, still with XeSS Deep Learning. We are exactly at 76 FPS, same as the A580, but now we are at Ultra instead of High. Really highly playable, but if you want to be more competitive, probably drop the settings to High or even Medium, because higher the FPS, the better. In terms of a starter, the frame time and frame graph was super smooth. Next in line will be the A770 8GB variant at 1080p Ultra settings and XeSS Deep Learning. We get an average of 78 FPS, only 2 FPS more than the A750, with the GPU pegged at 99, also using 4.1GB of VRAM, CPU and RAM didn't change, and the frame time frame graph is super smooth. I encounter a lower FPS here and there, but the map seems to be a bit more intense than the map from the A750, making the A770 8GB variant sometimes bend the knee to 65 FPS. Stepping up the A770 to 16GB of VRAM won't change anything because the game barely uses more than 4. The A770 LE, which is a lower clock than the A770 8GB variant OC. We have 1080p Ultra settings, XeSS Deep Learning. We have a 62 FPS average. Yes, it's a different map. I don't control which map I'm going to play. I think it's from the map that we have such a big difference between the 8GB and the LE. It is still playable, but we are at the limit to the 60 FPS threshold for a third-person shooter PvP eSport game. And since I have the VRAM available, I've tried Cinematic, because there's higher than Ultra, there's a Cinematic. Weirdly enough, for eSport game, you shouldn't use Cinematic. Anyway, when using Cinematic, our FPS drop it to the mid-40s and still using only 5.6GB of VRAM. The Cinematic preset is not an option, or not worth it. Jumping into the Battle Mage one, the B570, 10GB of VRAM, we are playing at 1080p Ultra settings, XeSS Deep Learning. We have the GPU pegged at 99% using 3.8GB of VRAM out of 10. CPU and RAM didn't change, and frame time frame graph is super smooth. We get an average FPS of 65, so we are above the 60 FPS to be deemed playable, but you can drop the settings to high or even medium to pump up a bit your FPS, or use lower setting of XeSS like quality or even balance, but is highly playable at ultra settings and XeSS deep learning. And finally, the Battle Mage B580 with 12GB of VRAM, even if we only using 4.5 for this map. GPU peg at 99%, CPU and RAM didn't change, and we get an average of 78 FPS, surprisingly the same FPS as the A770 8GB variant, because both are being played at 1080p, ultra settings and XeSS deep learning. But we are on a different map, so if this one is more heavier to run or render, maybe that's the reason we have the same results. But if this is the only game you play and you have the A770 8GB, it's not worth to upgrade to the B580, at least for now and for this game. And I also did a second test with the B580. I could have done that test with every other Intel Arc GPU, but decided to do it with this one only. Is the eSport presets. In the settings, you have low, medium, high, ultra, cinematic and eSport. So trying eSport changes some settings to low, medium and whatever it change, and set XeSS to automatic by default. We get an average of 137 FPS. We almost double our FPS. And for eSport shooter, PvP, third-person shooter, this is good, I guess. But that feels super smooth and it's easier to play than all the other settings that I've tried, even though I was aiming for over 60 FPS. In the end, every Intel Arc GPU can play this game, and I highly recommend that you use the eSport settings to maximize the FPS of the game for the highest playability possible. I didn't test the A550M or the A730M for this game, but I'm pretty sure they will play this game quite easily. And that's all I have to say for Mecha Break. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one, and subscribe.